Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Equals from a rainy but beautiful morning here in Nairobi, Kenya.
Yeah, rainy and beautiful.
Absolutely beautiful because the country is really over the moon at this son of theirs, Eliud Kipchoge, the man who's completed a marathon in under 2 hours. Can you believe that? 2 hours.
Amazing time. Really amazing.
And he's from a rural farm up country here in Kenya. Real hero, really someone who's I think brought the country together in a way I haven't seen before.
Definitely. This is a very divided country, but there's one thing that brings them together. It's pride in their runners, and really amazing. Makes you want to go running, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think I'm going to get on the track myself.
Well, I thought you had. I thought you started running.
Well, I have. I've got a few things going for me, I think. I've got my running going. I've got this podcast going. Life feels on the up,
Yeah, you've got a lot going on. I go running. I run very slowly. It's more like a shuffle. But, I find it very therapeutic. It clears my head. If
maybe something for us to do together, Max, in the future, maybe?
I think we already spend far too much time together, Nabil. But yeah, thanks for the offer.
Yeah, anyway, probably should save our therapy for off the podcast. But,
should we talk about what we're going to do on the podcast?
Absolutely. Really excited today to have Rutger Bregman with us for this podcast today, who Winnie will be interviewing. Rutger Bregman's Dutch historian. He brought out this book a couple of years ago that became really famous called Utopia for Realists. It's well worth a read. It talks about the big ideas, the big economic ideas to really save the economy.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. He's a historian as well, so he looks at the history of the ideas that dominate today, the kind of economic model that we're living underneath. He's really good at pointing out that this didn't come out of nowhere, that there's a clear history, and we're going to hear about that in the interview too.
And he became really famous, not just for his book, but a few months ago at Davos, when, with Winnie actually, he took on the billionaires, and he came out with this really brilliant line, this real zapper when he goes, "It feels like I'm at a firefighters conference and no one's supposed to be talking about water. Taxes, taxes, taxes." That's what we need to be talking about. Did you see that picture of even Rupert Murdoch reading his book?
Yeah, I thought that was quite funny. Rupert Murdoch, I'm not so sure I'd like to sign up to his kind of utopia, that's for sure.
Well, anyway, let's have a listen to Rutger today.
Yeah, let's listen.
Winnie, so nice to hear from you again.
Great to hear you. Thank you so much for joining us on Equals.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Well, it's a pleasure. Since we last met, you're now a very famous man, aren't you?
Well, I have good memories of the last time we met.
Yeah, you've taken on Fox News. You have a new book coming out. Is it out already?
Yeah, and you've moved on to a new job, right?
I am moving on to a new job, but I'm carrying my agenda with me. It's still an agenda about inequality. Of rights, of access to health, and so on. Let's pick up where we left off in Davos. I so enjoyed hearing people giving me feedback, and I kept asking why did it capture your attention? And people would say, because you're telling the truth. I said, but we always do. I always do. I said, no, but now you are telling it to the billionaires themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What did you hear?
Well, exactly the same thing. It was my first time at Davos, last year. So I thought it was just a bizarre experience. As I said at the conference as well, all these people talking about wonderful things like inequality and poverty and blah, blah, blah. But then they never really talk about their own obligations apart from philanthropy. So, but then you completely blew me away with your rant.
I usually have my talking points. I know what I want to say on a panel, but that day was, the billionaire gave us a godsend because he stood up to defend neoliberalism. And he was just spitting out all their half-truths, half-fact to make their case. And it was just the right thing we needed to push back. So I want to welcome you to Equals and
thank you.
Really congratulate you on the work you have done to explain the rise of neoliberalism. I've been fascinated by how you explain it so clearly, because many people, as you know, like to think that this is natural, that it came down from God.
Mm-hmm.
And you explain that these are economic ideas that were prepared, articulated, and driven over a long time, and now we've come to believe them as truth. So let's start there.
Well, you know, as a historian, I'm always very interested in the history of ideas, right? So when we talk about neoliberalism, this belief that, you know, the market can solve everything and that the government needs to get out of the way. Many people think that it started in the 1980s, you know, with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
And, you know, the wave of privatizations that followed back then. The interesting thing is that actually it started much, much earlier, already in the 50s. So back then there was a small group of philosophers and economists who called themselves the Mont Pèlerin Society. It was named after the small place where they met each year in Switzerland. And, you know, back then almost everyone was basically a socialist, right? So they were this small resistance group who was basically fighting against the growth of government because, you know, as you probably know, in the 50s and the 60s, the government was growing, the welfare state was expanding, and they thought that this was an absolutely terrible thing. So what they started to do is to develop their ideas, and what they said to themselves is, we just need patience, you know, we need to grow our institutions, our teachings, and at some point there will be a crisis in the current system, and then, you know, it's our moment has come, and it's you know, it happened just like that. So in the 1970s, as many people know, there were these oil crises. There was this phenomenon of what economists call stagflation. So the economy was stagnating, but there was also inflation, and then these economists and philosophers from the Mont Pèlerin Society, people like Milton Friedman, the famous American economist, they said, okay, we need to do everything differently. And they basically inspired Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan to become neoliberals. So that's basically how it happened. I'm always very interested in sort of the long life of ideas and where they start.
And it's your role is so important here. You mentioned the 50s, the rise of the welfare state, and you know, the New Deal in America, and ideas growing. I mean, even us here in Africa, we were fighting colonialism. We were developing our own thinking, economic thinking, right here close to where I am in Tanzania, the University of Dar es Salaam. Development thinkers from all over the world came and developed some thinking, and our thinking was very much of the important role of the state, a state that delivers an economy that will lift everyone out of poverty. Independence had to be about not just political but economic liberation. The non-aligned movement, we were resisting the pressure from the East and the West. The thinking was that we must break out of a colonial mentality, that we must depend on the Soviet Union or the American. So there was some thinking here, and we had thinkers coming from Canada, from the United States, from the Caribbean, from Asia, here in Tanzania. People like Walter Rodney, people like Jerry Helena from Canada, and others. But now you're saying that this small group, the Mont Pèlerin group, sold their ideas to big political leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and were able to crush the rest of us and our own thinking.
Exactly.
So
people are often very surprised when I tell them, you know, how big the role of government has been, for example, in the history of innovation. So one of my favorite examples is, you know, the iPhone. When we were at the World Economic Forum, one of the attendees was the brilliant economist Mariana Mazzucato. who has pointed out that every sliver of fundamental technology in the iPhone, everything that makes it a smartphone instead of a stupid phone. Think about the voice recognition system, the battery, mobile technology, the internet, everything that makes it into a cool thing. It was all developed by researchers on the government payroll. What Apple basically does is use all that technology, make it into a fancy design product, earn a huge amount of money, exploit their workers, and then pay no taxes at all, right? While at the same time, the real fundamental innovation is financed by the government with our tax dollars. So I'm not saying we don't need these companies to come up with these nice and beautiful products. I'm just saying that they need to pay their fair share of taxes so that we can fund the new round of innovations, right? In the green economy, for example. But this is something that many people have forgotten.
And price their innovations fairly, especially since they have been built on the backs of using public money.
Exactly. This happens often in the medicine industry, right?
Yeah.
Is that we, as taxpayers, we fund these breakthroughs, and then somehow these governments or these companies manage to get the intellectual rights or the intellectual property or whatsoever, and then they raise the prices of these medicines that are actually very, very cheap to produce, and they start earning a huge amount of money. Well, that's not being productive. That's just stealing from the rest of us.
Exactly. And they are holding the right to life in their hands. They can decide who lives and who dies because of how they price. And we're still fighting on the question of transparency of R&D. We never really know what their true costs are because they won't let us know. But they will hike the prices and decide who can live and who can't. Totally. And these things remain okay because of the ideas of these men you've talked about.
Yes, and exactly.
That's why I am so interested in explaining to people that it wasn't always like that and it can change. The role of thinkers, of intellectuals, combined with the power of politicians, can drive dangerous ideas.
I agree. In the West, we so often have this boring debate about capitalism versus socialism, right? As if we have to choose, the left versus right, or the market versus the state. I think that so often that's nonsense, right? You have so many varieties of capitalism. So the US is very, very different than Sweden, and technically they're both capitalist economies, right? But then in Sweden, they actually do guarantee human rights and proper healthcare and a well-designed welfare state, et cetera, et cetera. In the US, they often don't. So I think that whole debate just completely gets it wrong. Yes, we need companies to do a lot of stuff, but we also need governments to provide the basics, to get these innovations going, and we need people to actually pay their taxes. That's not rocket science. So I often have this feeling that we're sometimes stuck in these discussions from the Cold War age, right? When it was all about capitalism versus communism. And I sometimes wonder if that's still relevant today.
I wonder now how we can foster the real debate being about what kind of society do we want to have. So the principles, the norms, to have an agreed set of norms. It seems right now we are in a battle of norms. What kind of economy is a just economy? What kind of world do we want? And then to translate that back into rules.
There are good reasons to be pessimistic today, right? We've seen the election of Donald Trump. We've seen the election of Bolsonaro in Brazil. But then at the same time, there are many exciting things happening as well, right? So we all seen the extraordinary rise of someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman in the United States. We've seen Greta Thunberg basically conquering the world, and millions of kids around the globe striking for a better climate and for real climate action. So it's as they like to say, it's the worst of times, it's the best of times. I really have a feeling that the zeitgeist is changing very quickly right now, and that ideas that were dismissed not very long ago as unreasonable and unrealistic and impossible are now seriously being considered. Just look at the Democratic Party in the United States, right? Almost all of the candidates have embraced this idea of a Green New Deal, a huge investment program in the economy to make it sustainable. In many ways, things are shifting faster than ever. So that doesn't make me optimistic, but it does give me hope. I think that's what we need. You don't need to be an optimist, but at least you need to have some kind of hope, to believe that change is possible.
Yeah, you have said, I've read somewhere where you said to move forward, a society needs dreams, not nightmares. And on this question of neoliberalism, where do you see, what do you dream? Where do you think we could be?
Oh, I think we could do so many things. I've just recently read a wonderful book that is coming out next month by two American economists, Gabriel Zucman and Emmanuel Saez. The book is called The Triumph of Injustice, and it's about taxes and how we can make the rich pay. Because so often, I've read so many pieces and op-eds and essays about the injustice of the rich avoiding their taxes. But then so often you don't hear the solutions, right? It's just about, oh, this is never going to work out, and they'll always be able to hide their money in some tax paradise in the Bahamas or in Switzerland or whatever. But then here's a brilliant, very clear, short book that explains how we can actually do it and how we can actually cooperate to make the rich, force the rich to pay their fair share. So it's full of very practical solutions. I love that kind of thinking. I really love it, and I see more and more of it. And personally, I've written quite a bit about new ways to fight poverty.
Yes.
So for a long time,
tell me about that. You've been a supporter of universal basic income. You talk about a 15-hour work week. Are these real? Can they happen?
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about them.
They sound all pretty crazy, don't they?
Yeah.
So basic income, which is the idea of giving everyone a monthly grant that is, enough to pay for your basic needs, say food, shelter, clothing, bit of education. That idea, when I first started writing about it 5 years ago, it was really considered lunacy, right?
I'm not sure it's not lunacy. Persuade me.
But then the thing is that in the past couple of years, a huge debate has started, and there are actually now politicians. There's a major presidential candidate in the US, Andrew Yang, who's actually advocating a basic income to be implemented in the US. So that debate has happened very quickly. I mean, there are many versions of basic income out there. That's important to remember. There are actually right-wing versions. There are neoliberal versions of basic income that I'm strongly against. So I would like to finance this basic income in a way that it'll reduce inequality, right? So basically to make the rich pay for the basic income for all of us. But I'm especially interested in it because there's now so much research that shows that, well, to put it simply, poverty is not a lack of character, it's just a lack of cash.
I like that.
So the real experts on the poor's lives are the poor themselves. And the great thing about money is that you can do with it what you want.
This idea you have of universal basic income, if it can lead to every person feeling that they are valuable, then it is a great idea. Would it meet that?
I would like to basically have a society or live in a society where we rely more on intrinsic motivation, right? Where we give people the freedom to follow their own dreams and follow their own curiosities. The interesting thing about capitalism and communism is that basically they both relied, historically, in practice at least, on extrinsic motivation, right? So capitalism is all about the carrot, doing things for the money, and communism was in practice often about the stick, basically forcing people to work. But then I'd like to build a kind of society, and I believe that a basic income can play a big role here, where people can rely on their own visions and dreams and can follow them.
Honestly, we need to bring progressive thinkers together to also form another, what was that group called? We'll call ourselves not Mont Pèlerin, but maybe an African name, because we are at the bottom of the heap, but also because this is where humanity began. And force some new ideas that society, healthy, cohesive, sustainable communities are communities where everyone has an opportunity to contribute and everyone receives certain basics as a right: health, education, social protection. This shouldn't be on the basis of the money in your pocket.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the British economist John Maynard Keynes, who lived quite a long time ago. And he always emphasized the power of ideas. So often statesmen or politicians are just the slave of some economist whom they never heard of, right? And they have no idea that actually they're being governed and ruled by ideas of someone else. Now, it takes a bit of patience, right? So then change doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it takes a couple of years. We are now discussing things that were, 5 years ago, they were not on the table. So, just to give some examples from my perspective, just 5-6 years ago, no one in my, circle of friends was thinking about eating meat or reducing the amount of flying that they do. But now there's a continuous debate about all this stuff and about climate change. We're not there yet, but if you zoom out a little bit, then it's often exciting to see how quickly things can change.
Things can change. I'm a feminist, Rutger, and in my lifetime, in these feminist struggles, I've seen change happen, and I've seen us push ideas into the mainstream that are now accepted ideas when they were contested 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Feminist economists really have helped us to rethink the whole notion of what work actually is, right? So very often when people say work, they only think about paid work, about this thing you do in a hierarchical relationship with an employer, and you get paid and you pay taxes over that, etc. And then that's often the only thing we consider work. But then if you think a little bit longer about that, there's this huge amount of paid work that's not very important, right?
Yeah.
There are a huge amount of bankers and lawyers and consultants who can go on strike, and we wouldn't care, right? Actually, sometimes it would be great news if they would go on strike.
Yeah.
In my last book, I give one example of an Irish banking strike that happened in the 70s. It lasted for 6 months, and no one cared. It was just the economy just kept growing. It was like after 6 months, the bankers came back and said, "Oh, all right, we'll get back to work." Now, think about the scenario where all the people who do all the care work in this world, often unpaid, where they go on strike. That will be a disaster.
Some people die. Think of the elderly. Think of people
exactly.
with disability cared for by women in their families. What would happen?
Yeah, and we live in a world where often the most important work gets paid the least, and where the least important work, or actually the destructive, extractive work, where people basically exploit other people, those people earn a lot. So how can we move to an economy that is upside down from the version we have now? I think there are many things we can do. So taxes have to play a huge role here.
Yeah.
We should just need to disincentivize this extractive work. And again, we can make things better again as well. So there's nothing inevitable about the way we structure the economy right now. It can all be different.
So I am joining you as we start our own group of thinkers who are going to push for some progressive economics that will deliver a society where we live in more equality and there's more justice and sustainability. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to be your follower since you are the thinker and I'm the activist.
Well, I'll be following you as well.
You have an important message, Rutger. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much as well. It was really an honor to speak with you and to meet you at the World Economic Forum as well. To be honest, I thought you really were the star there. So it was great to be your partner in crime.
It was great
and
to be.
I'll be following all your work.
Yes, and I like your optimism and your dreams, and keep dreaming and let's keep fighting for a just and equal world.
Wow, consider my mind blown. I mean, these guys, Friedrich Hayek, Milton Friedman, the others with them, I mean, say what you want about their impact, but they were real visionaries, right? Where they literally changed the world, and we're living in the world that they created.
It's funny to call them inspiring, but in some ways they really are. It shows that big ideas can really change the world. And interestingly, they got their inspiration from socialists, because they felt the socialists had the upper hand for a long time in kind of painting a positive picture of the future, and that, you know, their view of capitalism had been on the back foot, so they were desperate to kind of re-inspire people as to the benefits of capitalism. It's
interesting you say back foot, right? Because one way to look at this, isn't it, is to look at the last 70, 80 years, to look at the impact of neoliberalism. But actually the free market ideas that underpin neoliberalism, they're really not new, right? So, you know, I was looking in preparation for this podcast, I was looking in the early 1800s, you saw people saying, we need the free market, and using that argument of the free market to justify child labour. I mean, there's kids under the age of 9, you know?
And slavery. I mean, the justification of self-interest, the justification of greed is as old as the capitalist economic system itself. But I think what the neoliberals did, and what was really clever, is they managed to kind of reinvigorate those ideas, make them feel new, make them feel fresh, and make a very strong link between them and freedom and the idea of being free.
And this is a great age where it's all about me, isn't it? It's all about the self. So in this kind of beautiful way almost, that neoliberalism came together with individualism, with the self, with this consumerist kind of society, isn't it?
And with equating that with freedom. I mean, in a sense, they had the help of, they started out in the middle of the Cold War, so they could juxtapose their system, the Western system, with the brutal oppression of the Soviet Union. But since that's all over, it does ring a bit hollow. I mean, how free is a sweatshop worker in Myanmar? You know, how free is a woman working 14 hours a day trying to get food on the table for her kids? That's not freedom in any sense of the word, really, is it?
I think people see these now actually as lies, right? They don't believe them anymore. And I think we're really starting to see that, you know, real freedom comes from, you know, if you're sick tomorrow and you know you've got, you know, healthcare there on your doorstep, that's freedom, isn't it? Knowing that, hey, that I'm going to be able to work to provide a better future for my kids to have chances in life. That sounds like freedom to me.
Yeah, freedom from the fear of losing your job, freedom from the fear of having to work all the hours just to make ends meet, and then the freedom to see your kids grow up, to spend time with your family, to spend time doing the things you care about. I think that's what freedom is really about, and I think people understand that.
I love how Rutger also said that, hey, you know, people don't want to hear nightmares, right? People want to hear dreams. It's almost like we need to drop our pens and pick up the paintbrushes and paint the better future, right?
I think that's right. I think what Rutger does and others do is they're beginning to kind of paint that picture of the big new progressive ideas that will capture people's imaginations. And it does feel, when I'm feeling at my most optimistic, I can see how progressives are beginning to seize the initiative again. They're the ones talking about the future. They're the ones talking about a better, more just, more equitable world. And, you know, that's the only way we're going to win.
Yeah, brilliant. So Rutger, thanks again, man. And thanks for everything you're doing as well to paint this brighter future of the world. So everyone, please do subscribe to the podcast. Please do send in your ideas and your feedback at equals@oxfam.org.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.